Emily watched through the bedroom window as the late afternoon sunlight broke through the clouds. The golden light covered the gardens of the grand mansion, but inside her heart, there was only darkness. Since her mother had passed away, life at home had become a nightmare. Her stepmother, Victoria, never hid the disdain she felt for her. Victoria entered the room without knocking, her strong perfume filling the air. With cold eyes, she flashed a venomous smile at Emily, sending a chill down her spine. "I have a surprise for you, my dear," Victoria said in a slow, deliberate voice, as if she was about to reveal something important. Emily remained silent, already accustomed to the traps disguised as sweet words. Her heart began to race, but she stayed composed. "You're going to get married," Victoria abruptly announced. Emily's eyes widened. Her body froze as her mind tried to absorb the words. Married? How? She had never even been courted by anyone. No one had come near her since her stepmother controlled every aspect of her social life. With whom? Emily's voice came out low, almost a whisper. Victoria's smile grew even more, turning cruel. "Oh, you'll love him. Your fiancé is a man who perfectly reflects what you deserve," she said with a malicious tone, leaning in closer. "A beggar. James, if I remember correctly." Emily's world collapsed in an instant. A beggar? She looked at Victoria, searching for any sign that this was some cruel joke, but the coldness in her stepmother's face told her otherwise. Victoria was determined to humiliate her in the most heartless way possible. "I'm not marrying someone I don't know. And a beggar?" Emily tried to protest, but her voice faltered. "You don't have a choice, dear. Unless you'd prefer to be thrown out on the streets without a penny." Victoria crossed her arms, clearly pleased with the shock on her stepdaughter's face. "Think of it as a chance to learn your place." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria turned on her heel and left the room, leaving Emily alone with the weight of her fate. Feeling like a prisoner, Emily collapsed onto her bed, silent tears streaming down her face. Her heart was shattered. How had her life come to this? That same night, as Emily struggled to accept her cruel reality, Victoria walked through the dark streets of the city, where she found James, a man who appeared to be everything she had described. His disheveled hair and dirty clothes marked him as a man society had long ignored. He sat at a street corner, watching the passers-by, invisible to everyone else. "You must be James," Victoria said as she approached him with an air of superiority. "I have a proposal for you." James looked up, studying her for a moment. He didn't seem surprised by her approach. Something in her tone revealed she wasn't there out of charity. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice rough from years on the streets. Victoria smiled coldly and explained her plan. James was to marry her stepdaughter, Emily, and in return, he would receive a generous sum of money. To him, it seemed like a golden opportunity. After all, what did he have to lose? "And if I accept," James began, looking her directly in the eyes, "what happens to her afterward?" "That's not your problem," Victoria replied impatiently. "All you need to do is marry her. After that, you're free to leave. With your money, of course." James nodded slowly, as if considering the offer, before finally agreeing. "Deal." The news of the engagement was met with shock and ridicule. Family, friends, neighbors, and acquaintances laughed behind their hands, whispering about how Emily, the young heiress to a fortune, was now marrying a beggar. Victoria was triumphant, convinced she had found the perfect way to destroy Emily's dignity. During dinner, Victoria formally announced the engagement. "Emily, dear, tell our guests about your future husband, James." Victoria's voice dripped with venomous cynicism. Emily, pale, could barely speak. She felt everyone's eyes on her, judging her, mocking her. "I am engaged to James," she said, her voice almost breaking. but trying to maintain her composure. Her heart was heavy with shame, but something inside her still fought against the cruelty. Victoria smiled with satisfaction. She had gotten what she wanted. Emily was being humiliated in public, and no one dared to question the decision. Little did she know, however, that James, the man she had chosen as the instrument of her malice, held a secret that would change everything. The atmosphere in the house shifted into an uncomfortable mix of curiosity and disgust after the engagement announcement. People whispered in corners, barely containing their scorn for Emily's situation. However, one figure stood out among the murmurs and judging stares: James. His calm and reserved behavior intrigued everyone, and unlike what they expected from a beggar, he didn't seem intimidated. That night, already emotionally drained, Emily felt a need to speak with James before the ceremony was arranged. She had to understand why he had agreed to marry her, knowing how humiliating this union would be. They met in the mansion's garden under the moonlight. The silence between them was heavy, but Emily knew she had to break it. "Why did you accept this?" Emily asked, her voice weak but full of pain. "You know this is just a scheme by my stepmother, don't you? She wants to humiliate me." James watched her in silence for a moment. His eyes, which seemed to carry the weight of many untold stories, finally met hers. "I know, Emily," he answered, his voice low but steady. "But things aren't always what they seem." Emily frowned, confused by his cryptic response. What was he trying to say? She had expected to find either desperation or greed in him, but instead, she found something deeper, something she couldn't quite understand. "Then why are you doing this?" she pressed, unable to hide the desperation in her voice. "If you know it's a trap, why go along with it?" James sighed and looked toward the horizon, as if searching for the right words. "Let's just say I have my own reasons," he finally said. "But I'll tell you one thing. You don't deserve this. And when the time is right, I'll make sure everyone knows it." The mystery in James' words only deepened Emily's confusion. Why did he seem so sure, so in control? What was he hiding? She felt a strange comfort in his presence, even though she didn't fully understand what was happening. "I don't understand," Emily whispered, shaking her head. James took a step closer, and his eyes locked with hers again, this time with an intensity she hadn't expected. "You'll understand soon enough. Just trust me." Trust. That word felt foreign to Emily. She had lost so much over the past few years. Her mother, her father, her freedom. Trusting someone again seemed almost impossible. But there was something in James's eyes that made her hesitate. There was a sincerity there she couldn't ignore. Without another word, James slowly walked away, leaving Emily alone in the garden, lost in her thoughts. What was he planning? And how could he possibly change the cruel reality that Victoria had forced upon both of them? In the days that followed, preparations for the wedding moved swiftly. Victoria, thrilled with the success of her scheme, reveled in every detail that made the event more bizarre and humiliating for Emily. The dress was plain, almost an insult to tradition, and the ceremony would be small, just enough for everyone to witness Emily's humiliation. Emily, though reluctant, began to resign herself to the idea that her fate was sealed. But something about James's calm demeanor left her unsettled. He didn't seem like a desperate man after money. There was something about him that eluded everyone's understanding, including Victoria, who had completely underestimated him. On the eve of the wedding, Victoria called Emily for a conversation. The smile on Victoria's face was as venomous as ever, and she seemed more excited than usual. "Tomorrow is the big day," Victoria said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "I hope you're ready for what's to come." Emily looked at her for a moment, and for the first time, she didn't feel afraid. Maybe it was the mystery surrounding James, or maybe it was the fact that, finally, she knew she wasn't alone. Something big was about to happen, and she could feel it. "I'm ready, Victoria," Emily replied calmly, much to her stepmother's surprise. Victoria narrowed her eyes, suspicious. She hadn't expected that response. "We'll see," she muttered before leaving the room, leaving Emily alone with her thoughts. As the hours passed slowly, Emily reflected on everything that had happened. James, the man who was supposed to be her tormentor, felt more like a protector. What was he planning? And how did he know so much about Victoria and her schemes? Deep down, Emily knew the answer would come soon. The next day would bring more than just a forced marriage. Something was about to happen, and whatever it was, it would change everything. The day had finally arrived. The mansion was strangely quiet as guests, a mix of curiosity and disdain, began to arrive. Victoria was radiant. Every detail of the wedding had been designed to be a public humiliation for Emily, from the plain and dull dress to the modest venue in the back garden, far from the grandeur of the mansion. Emily, dressed in the attire her stepmother had imposed on her, stared at her reflection in the mirror. Her heart was racing, but instead of just fear, there was something else. A tension in the air, as if everyone was on the verge of a great revelation. James's words from days before echoed in her mind. "When the time is right, I'll make sure everyone knows." What did he know that she didn't? A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. The door opened, and James stepped in. He was dressed simply, as expected, but there was something about his demeanor that made him seem different. Even in the role of a beggar, he exuded an uncommon calm, as if he were completely in control of the situation. Emily glanced at him through the mirror, and he looked back at her with the same serene and determined eyes. "Are you ready?" he asked, with a calmness that was supposed to reassure her, but only heightened her anxiety. "I don't think I have a choice, do I?" Emily replied, not turning her face. James gave a slight smile, but it was a smile filled with something deeper. "We all have choices, Emily. We just need to know the right time to make them." Before she could respond, Victoria appeared at the door. "It's time," she said, the smile on her face revealing the pleasure she felt in seeing her stepdaughter ready for what she believed was the peak of humiliation. James and Emily walked to the ceremony site. The garden was decorated simply, with few chairs, occupied by a crowd that could barely contain their whispers and looks of disdain. The afternoon sun cast long shadows on the lawn, but the real weight was in the charged atmosphere. Victoria, sitting in the front row, couldn't hide her satisfaction. Everything was going exactly as planned. The officiant, an older man visibly uncomfortable with what was happening, began the ceremony. The silence was almost suffocating, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant sound of the wind. "We are gathered here today to join," he began, but the ceremony felt mechanical, devoid of emotion. Emily could barely hear the words. Everything seemed like a blur as she tried to understand why James was so calm. What did he know? What was he hiding? "If anyone has any reason why these two should not be married, speak now or forever hold your peace," said the officiant, his tone hesitant, as if he knew this moment wouldn't end as expected. That's when James took a step forward. The movement shocked everyone. The crowd, previously passive observers, leaned in, sensing that something important was about to happen. He looked directly at Victoria, his gaze firm and piercing. "As a matter of fact, I have something to say." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Victoria shifted uncomfortably in her seat, the smile that had once graced her face starting to falter. "What are you doing?" Victoria hissed, her eyes narrowing. James ignored her question and turned to address the guests. "You all see me here as a homeless man, someone without value, someone who, in Victoria's eyes, was the perfect choice to destroy Emily's dignity." His voice was clear and strong, echoing through the garden. "But what she doesn't know, or refuses to acknowledge, is that I am not who she thinks I am." The silence that followed was absolute. Everyone stared at James, utterly stunned. Emily, who had been a whirlwind of emotions, was frozen. What was he saying? "My real name is James Harrison," he continued, and for the first time, the name began to make sense to some of the guests. "I am the heir to one of the largest fortunes in the country." The words landed like a bomb. The murmurs among the guests turned into a frenzy. Victoria stood up abruptly, her eyes wide, unable to hide the shock and fear growing on her face. "This is ridiculous," Victoria shouted, her voice trembling with anger. "You're lying. You're a beggar. A nobody." James didn't take his eyes off her. "I became a beggar because I chose to disappear for a while, to test the true intentions of the people around me," he said, then shot a sharp glance at Victoria. "And now I know who lives to step on others, and who deserves respect and dignity." Victoria was speechless, the color draining from her face. Emily stared at James, completely shocked. "He, an heir? How is that even possible?" "Victoria," James said, stepping closer to Emily's stepmother, "you thought you could use my circumstances to destroy Emily's life, but all you've done is reveal your own cruelty." Victoria tried to speak, but no words came out. The control she had always held over the situation was crumbling before everyone's eyes. "And Emily," James turned to her, softening his tone, "you're the only person here who deserves better. This wedding, it doesn't have to happen. The choice is yours." The silence that followed James's revelation was deafening. Every eye was on Emily, as if the fate of everyone at the ceremony hung on her next word. The young woman, overwhelmed, struggled to process the flood of information. Her heart raced, and her hands trembled as she looked at James, or rather, the man she thought she knew. Now, he was a complete mystery. Victoria, still standing, was livid. Her eyes, which had once gleamed with cruelty, now widened with a mix of fury and fear as her control slipped away. "Emily, you can't believe this," Victoria exclaimed, her voice laced with desperation. "He's lying. This is all a farce." But there was something in James's eyes that left no room for doubt. He was calm, almost serene, like someone who already knew the outcome before the decision was even made. Emily glanced at the crowd, feeling the weight of their curious stares. For a moment, all she wanted was to disappear. How could she make a decision in the midst of such chaos? Her instincts told her to run, to protect herself. But suddenly, something stronger stirred inside her. Emily began, her voice shaky, but Victoria interrupted her. "Don't do this, Emily." Victoria took a few steps forward, her voice dripping with a barely disguised threat. "You know you won't survive without me. You're ungrateful. Everything I've done was for you. This marriage was for your own good." The words sounded hollow and insincere. Deep down, Emily knew there was never any love, never any genuine concern. Victoria's every move had always been about power and control. James stood by, watching without pressuring her, but Emily could feel the expectation in his eyes. It was as if he was waiting for her to see the world clearly for the first time. And in that moment, something shifted. Emily lifted her head, and with a confidence she never knew she had, she spoke. "No, Victoria. Everything you've ever done has been for yourself, to control me and destroy me." Her voice, though soft, carried an unexpected strength. "And today, I choose not to be your victim anymore." The guests, who had been watching the scene unfold with a mix of fascination and horror, now leaned in, captivated by Emily's unexpected courage. Victoria stood frozen, as though she'd been struck by a sudden gust of wind. For the first time, her control was slipping through her fingers. Emily turned to James, feeling the weight of her decision. "And as for you," she said, still trying to grasp who he truly was. "I don't know who you really are, but I know I don't want to marry anyone by force. Not you and not her." James smiled, a genuine smile this time, as if her answer was exactly what he had been hoping for. He gave a slight bow. "I want nothing more than your freedom, Emily. The choice was always yours." Victoria, furious, interrupted again. "You're making a huge mistake," she shrieked, her voice shrill and echoing through the garden. "You'll never be anything without me, without this family." Emily turned to face her, and this time, there was no fear in her eyes. "Maybe I was never really part of this family, Victoria, and I'd rather be no one than remain your puppet." Emily's words hit Victoria like a blow, causing her to stumble back, unable to maintain control. The crowd murmured nervously, as if finally understanding the true dynamic between the two women. Victoria, realizing that her carefully crafted plans were unraveling, shot a venomous glare at James. "You won't get away with this unscathed, you miserable wretch," she screamed, losing all semblance of composure. James, his expression unchanging, took a step toward her, his voice calm but laden with unshakable authority. "You've already lost, Victoria. Today is not my day of humiliation. It's yours. And everyone here is a witness to your downfall." Victoria tried to gather herself, but the power in her words had drained away. She looked around, searching for support from the guests, but found only looks of judgment and disdain. Desperate, she turned and stormed out of the garden, her footsteps echoing on the stone path leading back to the mansion. The sound of her heels was the last thing anyone heard before silence settled over the scene. Emily stood still for a moment, a mixture of relief and emptiness washing over her, as though she had just let go of a burden she'd been carrying for years. James approached slowly but kept a respectful distance. "You were brave today," he said softly. Emily took a deep breath, unsure of how to respond. There were so many questions racing through her mind, so many emotions left to process. "What happens now?" she finally asked, staring into the distance where her stepmother had disappeared. James looked around, the guests slowly dispersing, whispering among themselves about what had just transpired. He smiled, but his eyes held a certain seriousness. "Now, Emily, you have the chance to become whoever you want to be, free from Victoria's shadow. But first, we need to talk. There's much more you need to know." Emily furrowed her brow. "More secrets?" "Not secrets," James replied. "Truths. And believe me, they're going to change everything you think you know." The silence between Emily and James was heavy, weighed down by all the unspoken words. Night was falling quickly, the sky darkening, while the garden lights cast a soft glow around them. Emily didn't know what to expect from James, and the uncertainty began to gnaw at her. "What did you mean by truths that will change everything?" Emily finally broke the silence, unable to hide her exhaustion. "If there's something I need to know, just say it. I'm tired of feeling lost in all of this." James hesitated for a moment, as if he was trying to figure out the best way to begin. He knew that what he was about to say had the power to alter everything Emily believed about her life. "When Victoria chose me to humiliate you, I agreed because I realized there was something more going on. Something I might be able to help with," James began, his voice low but steady. "Something told me there was more to this story. I started asking questions, investigating, and what I discovered about Victoria is far darker than you can imagine." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. Victoria's name had always carried a shadow, but the tone in James' voice suggested there was more than just cruelty involved. "What did you find out?" Emily asked, her voice now just a whisper, as if afraid of the answer. James stepped closer, his expression serious. "Victoria isn't just a greedy, manipulative woman. She has a past filled with fraud, dangerous alliances, Your father's death? Emily's eyes widened in shock. What are you saying? She felt the world spinning around her. My father died in an accident. That's what they always told me. James slowly shook his head. That's what she wanted you to believe. But in reality, Victoria had a lot to gain from his death. Your father was about to uncover some of the illegal activities Victoria was involved in and confront her. Shortly after that, the accident happened. Emily raised her hand to her mouth, trying to process what she was hearing. Her heart raced. How could this be possible? Victoria had always been cold and controlling, but the idea that she might have been behind her father's death was something Emily had never even considered. Are you sure about this? Emily's voice trembled. How can you prove it? James took a deep breath and pulled out some folded documents from his pocket, which he carefully placed on the table between them. I found old bank records, contracts, and even conversations that were covered up at the time of your father's death. Victoria funneled large sums of money, manipulated contracts, and made deals with people who helped conceal what really happened. She knew your father was going to find out and leave her. The accident was just too convenient. Emily stared at the papers in front of her, but felt unable to touch them. It was as if by doing so, she would be acknowledging that the woman who had ruined her life had also taken her father from her. And why are you telling me this now? She asked, struggling to hold back tears. Why wait until now? James watched her for a moment before answering. Because I had to be sure. During the time I infiltrated your life to do what Victoria asked, I was also investigating, gathering information, trying to figure out what she was hiding. And now, with everything in my hands, I know you deserve the truth. He paused, seeing the confusion in Emily's eyes. And together, we can expose Victoria. We can make her pay for what she did to you and your father. Emily looked at James, her mind spinning. Everything she thought she knew was crumbling around her. The woman she had feared and hated for so long was actually far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. But how could she deal with this now? How could she move forward with the sham of a marriage when everything in her life had been built on lies? She took a deep breath, trying to find some footing in the chaos. I don't know what to do. Her voice cracked, revealing her vulnerability. James reached out, holding her gaze with intensity. You're not alone, Emily. We can do this together. Victoria can't control your life anymore. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the tears fall. Everything felt uncertain, but there was one thing she knew for sure. Whatever came next, Victoria wouldn't dictate the terms of her life anymore. She opened her eyes, feeling a new strength rising within her. If we're going to do this, she said, her voice now steadier, then I need to know everything. Everything Victoria's done. And I need enough evidence to bring her down. James nodded, seeing Emily's resolve strengthen. I have everything we need, Emily. She looked at him with determination, her thoughts quickly organizing. It was time to confront Victoria head-on, and she knew the road ahead would be dangerous. Then let's begin. Emily stood up, her expression resolute. I'm not going to let her destroy anyone else. The cold night wind rustled the curtains as Emily prepared for the final showdown with Victoria. Her mind was buzzing with everything she had just learned. Now, she was ready to face the woman who had controlled her life and destroyed her father. James stood by her side, focused. The evidence he had gathered during his investigation was tucked inside a folder he held firmly. It was time for the truth to come out. Are you sure you're ready? James asked, noticing the tension on Emily's face. She took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of fear and determination. Yes, it's time to end this. Victoria's mansion loomed larger than ever, its pristine walls hiding dark secrets. Emily walked in with determined steps, James following close behind. They would confront Victoria in her office, the place where so many decisions had been made at her expense. When they arrived, Victoria was standing, her usual air of superiority intact. She watched them enter, a cynical smile playing on her lips. "So, you've finally come," Victoria said in a soft but venomous voice. "I thought you'd have more courage, Emily. Did you bring the beggar to try and intimidate me?" Emily felt her anger rise but stayed calm. She wouldn't let Victoria manipulate her anymore. "We're not here to play your game, Victoria," Emily replied firmly. "We're here to end the lies." Victoria raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Lies? Sweetheart, you never knew how to play this game. I control everything. What do you think you can do against me?" James stepped forward and placed the folder on Victoria's desk. "Everything is here. Proof that you stole Emily's father's money, the fraud, the bribes, and, of course, the circumstances surrounding his death. You're not getting away this time." Victoria froze for a moment, her smile fading. Her eyes darkened. "You think you'll beat me with these papers?" She laughed, but it was a hollow sound. "I'm untouchable. You're just children playing with fire." Emily wasn't intimidated. "It's not just about the documents. I know what you did, and the world will know too. If you refuse to turn yourself in, I'll take all of this to the police and the press." Victoria clenched her fists, her eyes sparking with anger. "You wouldn't dare." "Oh, I would," Emily cut in, her voice sharp. "I'm not afraid of you anymore. You took my father from me. You treated me like an object. But now, it all ends. Either you turn yourself in, or I will, and I'll make sure you spend the rest of your life behind bars." For a moment, time seemed to stop. Victoria stared at Emily, and for the first time, a flicker of fear flashed in her eyes. She was cornered. Everything she had built was crumbling before her. "You're making a mistake," Victoria tried, but her voice sounded more desperate than threatening. Emily took a step forward, facing the woman who had been her stepmother. "No, Victoria. The only mistake was thinking you could control everything forever." James stood silently, letting Emily handle the confrontation. This was her moment. Finally, Victoria lowered her head, defeated. She knew there was no way out. James took out his phone, and with a quick call, summoned the authorities to deal with Victoria's fate. When the police arrived, Victoria was led away without saying a word, but her gaze remained locked on Emily, as if she still craved some form of revenge. But it was too late. The empire of lies Victoria had built was collapsing. With Victoria out of their lives, Emily finally felt the weight she had carried for so long lift from her shoulders. She looked at James, who was watching her with a mixture of pride and relief. "And now?" James asked softly. Emily smiled, still feeling the adrenaline coursing through her. "Now," she paused, glancing around, finally free. "Now, it's my turn to live." Months passed, and Emily had regained control of her life. Her father's company had been restored, and alongside James, she was determined to make a fresh start. The past, though painful, had been exposed, and the wounds were slowly healing. Victoria, on the other hand, was in prison, her reputation destroyed. Those who had once supported her now avoided her, and her downfall was swift and absolute. The story of her fraud and manipulation spread like wildfire, burning every bridge she had built over the years. The woman who once presented herself as a figure of power and influence was now just a shadow of her former self, isolated and powerless. Emily, however, moved forward, knowing that despite everything, she had won. Not just against Victoria, but against the fear that had held her captive for so long. With each passing day, she felt stronger and more confident, embracing the new responsibilities that came with running the company. Slowly, Emily began to implement changes, bringing a fresh vision and work ethic to the business. With James by her side, she created a welcoming and inclusive environment where everyone could thrive. Their love and friendship deepened, becoming a solid foundation in their lives. On a sunny day, as she prepared for an important meeting, Emily looked out the office window, admiring the vast garden surrounding the mansion. She smiled as she spotted a family of ducks swimming in a small pond, a symbol of the new life blossoming around her. "Ready to conquer the world?" James asked, breaking her thoughts. She turned to him, her eyes shining. "Ready to conquer my world," she replied, the determination in her voice unmistakable. Deep down, Emily knew that the real victory wasn't just in defeating Victoria, but in finding her own strength. With courage, she was writing a new chapter, one that reflected her true self. Now, her life was finally hers, and she was ready to embrace the future waiting for her. A future of freedom, love, and endless possibilities. The past was behind her, and the lessons learned had become a part of who she was, but no longer a burden she had to carry.